It is my great pleasure to announce our next speaker, Alexander Lvov, from the University of St. Petersburg.
So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for having me here. I'm very much appreciated and honored with such a great invitation made by Professor Dr. Bogdana Kolevic and all the colleagues which are enjoying me here. So, when Professor Kolevic told me about those who are going to meet and to talk to in Serbia and here in Banja Luka, in Republic of Srpska, there were always professors and doctors who managed to think that this is not only Republic of Srpska but also Republic of Scholars, like, a kind of an ideal of the Age of Enlightenment. So it's very wonderful for me to present to you my ideas concerning some conceptual analysis of Russia and the West. And first of all, I have to say that I'm not a geopolitician, I'm not a political scientist, I'm not a sociologist, I'm a philosopher, and that's why I'm not maybe very well I cannot be a very good source concerning the analysis of the current situations, but at the same time, conceptual analysis is sometimes that what is really in demand, because we are talking about certain important things that should be articulated and the way they could be articulated. From these terms, I would like to say some words about the conceptual opposition about Russia as a certain concept, which was delivered and understood also towards the understanding and of the articulation of the so-called collective West. And I would like to do it in two steps. So the first one would be a kind of the historical perspective of the relations between Russia and the West as the concepts. And I would like to emphasize that I'm not going to talk about the countries or political subjects. I'm going to speak about conceptual things. So how Russia understood itself towards or in opposition or sometimes in collaboration with the West as a certain conceptual project. But the second point of my meditation concerns the idea how the values, or what we used to call the values, change into the means. And this merges a little bit with what Mr. President Dodik was talking about concerning values and means. And I would try to show that the discussions which are nowadays very much in demand really tend to turn into decisions made by order, not by a certain goodwill. And this is how I think we could come to some conclusions concerning the current situations in terms of collaboration. I mean, international collaboration, which is, as far as I believe and understand, is certainly the future for the whole world, not only Europe or the West as such. So, to start, I would like to make the statement that concerning Russia, we can say that it has always conceptualized West as a certain enemy in terms of the civilizational project. And this was a kind of a negative aspect of the great project which Russia always really tried to achieve in terms of its messianic point of view and so forth. When meeting here some colleagues in Serbia and in the Republic of Srpska, I found very interesting thing concerning the reconsideration of Europe by colleagues here, and this is what actually we really need to, because both Russia and Europe are non-native, so to say, concepts, right? They are the concepts borrowed from the Greeks, because Russia was actually coined in under Byzantine Empire, right, from the chronicles and writings by Byzantine scholars. And Europe is a kind of, very a very important thing to consider because of its sensibility, I would say, right? There are many meanings and many approaches to how to understand what Europe means, and one of these approach certainly concerns so-called collective West, And let me now draw to three cases which I find illustrative in terms of how this conceptual West can be possible. So first of all, I would like to draw your attention to the case of Moscow the Third Rome, this kind of ideology or a certain worldview formulated in the 16th century by Philotheos, right, even 15th, 16th century by Philotheos of Moscow, who understood Moscow as actually the successor of the Christian culture, and Moscow could be third and actually the ultimate Rome because of the idea of Holy Trinity, because of the idea of kind of legacy of real Christianity. And what is important, this idea was coined in his letters to Ivan the Terrible, Ivan the Terrible's father, Vasily III, Grand Duke of Russia, and his son, Ivan the Terrible, was actually the one who accepted this idea and proposed probably the most important evidences of how Russia is the true Western culture, true European culture, true Christian culture, and all the other cultures, for example, in his discussion with Lithuania, then time, right, Lithuania or England and so forth, they are not Western enough, so to say. In his letters we can see that very clearly. The same thing we can find in the ideas of Peter the Great, who decided to establish the Russian Empire and to make the Russians even be more Western than the Westerners themselves, right? Many of them were brought into Russia, they just came to Russia to take their military service and cultural studies. Of course, they were invited and so forth, but at the same time, it is interesting that the project of Russian Empire, which started actually in the beginning of the 18th century, gave very profound fruit in the beginning of the 19th century. Just to mention the system of education given in Lyceum, Pushkin, our great poet, which is actually, the main fruit probably of the Age of Enlightenment, and of course, a very important and profound links and connections with the classic Western culture because of translations, because of studies of the Russians in the foreign German and French mainly universities, and because of many discoveries that really Russian people did abroad. For example, the establishment of so-called Russian California, right, which happened in the middle of the 18th century. So this was also kind of a project to show that, Russia is and cannot be is a Western country and cannot be excluded from the families of Western countries. This is actually what you can see visiting St. Petersburg, probably the most European city nowadays, in terms of styles, in terms of variety, and of course in terms of this kind, I would say, of imperial message which is given by all this kind of architecture and cultural connections. I would certainly now draw to the third case, which concerns the project of USSR. And again, this is also something that we can find as a very Western project. What I mean to say is that the ideology of the Soviet Union, as you know, was Marxist ideology, and Marx is probably one of the most disputable and profound and, of course, influential Western philosopher, right? At the same time, we understand that many revolutionists really were active in the West during the Russian Empire. They started in the Western universities, they spent their time in Western countries, and everything they actually do was to elaborate, or I beg your pardon, to liberate West, right? Liberate West from this kind of bourgeois approach, to the countries they take part in this kind of project. This is also a disputable topic, but at the same time, I mean to say that Russia has always understood itself as a kind of stronghold of Western values, or what we can say as, and try to reconstruct those values in terms of the universal things, Many people say that the messianic attitude of Russia that we find in in its literature, in its culture, sometimes in the everyday life even, is actually closely connected with the Christian worldview, right, or with the Christian impact on the culture, and of course with the Greek, right, Platonic, so to say, right, paradigm, which is very close to Orthodox Christianity. And what's interesting, one of the main characteristics of such a messianic worldview is what they call Twain cosmology. So it means that we have two dimensions, so to say, an immanent and transcendent. And the immanent is the one of history, and transcendent is the one of, so to say, eternal history or truth. As in Russian we say pravda, which is not very well translated into actually modern languages such as the English language. But at the same time, it is important to mention that everything that goes on the earth, so to say, should be understood as a certain reflection on the heaven, right, on this transcendental level of what we can call all human values or universal values. At least this is the position of the Russian classical literature. In his speech on Pushkin's monument, Dostoevsky said about Pushkin's genius as all human genius, right? That means that Pushkin managed to grasp the main virtues and values, right, that different cultures produce, and imply them into his writing, which really made great impact on the Russian way of thinking and Russian language and so forth. So that is why the question of values is very much important in contemporary discourse. And here I can see an important danger to be mentioned, because we see nowadays that values which we used to consider as universal nowadays turn into so-called means to achieve certain political, economical, ideological, and so forth, various interests, right? So this actually turns the very realm of values to the realm of realpolitik, so to say, right? Of the kind of real politics in which the interests only take place and we cannot discuss anything anymore because of no ground for that, right? Unless we understand values as the certain importance, we don't have actually foundation for the further dialogue, which is really important. And I believe that for the contemporary West, Russia is a kind of, a mirror, a looking glass in which it reflects with all its achievements and failures, virtues and vices, advantages and disadvantages, because of such a close relation to what was understood as the universal values given from the great Western culture, great Western art, great Western philosophy, but at the same time, Russia, again, in conceptual sense, Russia feels responsibility for these values to be maintained and to be supported. What's interesting, I could only just draw to the case of a certain edict, the President of Russia's edict number 809, which was published on November the 9th, 2022. This is about so-called traditional values, and it was, very much controversial in Russia. So many intellectuals say for, many said against. But I'm not going to discuss it, but I would like to draw attention to Article 5, to the list of so-called traditional values in this document. And let me just read what is the list. So, according to this paragraph, to this article, we see that they are life, dignity, civil rights and liberties, patriotism, civil consciousness, service to motherland and responsibility for its future, high moral ideals, strong family, creative work, priority of spiritual over material, humanism, mercy, justice, collectivism, mutual respect and helpfulness, historical memory and succession of generations, unity of the peoples on Russia. So, to be honest, I believe that this is not just, something very traditionally Russian in terms of appearance in, you know, the minds of the Russian intellectuals of the 12th or 11th century so far. Yeah, these are the values which were formulated in the discourse of enlightenment. And I would really say that many intellectuals and maybe even just ordinary people, so to say, not only in Russia but in broad in foreign countries, probably in the Western countries and even Eastern countries as well, would support most, if not all, of these values, right? Because they tend to be a kind of, you know, universal values, not to say just, you know, restricted in the borders of the Russian-speaking world. That is why I think that all of what I was talking about shows that Russia is part and parcel, actually, of the Western civilization, again, in conceptual terms, how we understand West as the domain of culture, philosophy, you know, West as a certain creative, right, intellectual product and project. And this is why it is impossible just to cancel Russia from the Western world. It means that we have to reconsider the West as such, right? It actually means that Russia is an inalienable part of the element of the Western civilization, Western world. So this kind of opposition of, like, you know, the decay of the West and the rise of the East, I find very provocative. On the one hand, it could be fruitful in terms of self-organization, self-understanding, self-consideration. But on the other hand, I believe that this kind of self-understanding really provides us with possibility of the future dialogue, right? Because what is really important is understanding oneself, as Professor Tuman told about in geopolitical terms, right? Self-grounded, right? Self-efficient. And from this point of view, I believe that the dialogue of traditions is really much in demand and could be really profound to achieve those goals of further collaboration in the various parts of the world. I would like to finish with just a saying from Heraclitus, if you don't mind, his famous fragment 30 in Dils Krantz. So this world, which is the same for all, no one of gods or men has made, but it was ever, is now, and ever shall be, an ever living fire, with measures of its kindling and measures going out. So this is what he said about the universe, cosmos. This is, I believe, could be also said about Russia as well. And just to illustrate that this kind of ideas are also discussable among our Western partners, I would like to show you this slide with a fragment of the curriculum of Harrow School, famous English school, right? And they have, you know, they have subjects to teach, and among them are foreign languages. Russian is an optional. And when they present why Russian language is important to be studied, they say that, you know, as well as being a truly beautiful language to the ear, which I believe, I cannot really check, Russian is also very useful in a wide range of careers in businesses, politics, diplomacy, and the military in the coming years, arguably more than ever before. So that is curriculum for 2022-2023. Let us believe to our partners in the West. Thank you very much for your attention.